9 seconds. What can you accomplish in 9 seconds? That's how long it takes a hiring manager to evaluate a resume. In 9 seconds, you can open and close an umbrella. In 9 seconds, you can tie one shoelace. In 9 seconds, you can become a part of history. This is the story of Special Delivery Jones. Welcome to the Jobber Chronicles. Conrad Ephraim was born March 30th, 1945 in the village of Pigots on Antigua, a Caribbean island that was still a British colony for the first 13 years of his life. It is impossible to know now if the two events were connected, but Ephraim left Antigua and migrated to St. Croix the very same year that Antigua became independent. In that same year of 1958, at the tender age of 13, he would meet a girl named Kathleen in San Juan, who would become the most important person in his life. 11 years later, in 1969, Ephraim married Kat on St. Croix, and they would be together for the rest of his life. In the early 1970s, the newlyweds relocated from their tropical paradise to their new concrete paradise, migrating to the Bronx where Conrad went to work for the phone company. His life in athletics began as a hobby, as in his free time he would box and lift weights at a local gym. At the gym, he caught the eye of New York independent wrestler Mr. Haiti, who began training Ephraim in the basics of professional wrestling. Before long, Mr. Haiti passed him off to Johnny Rodz, who began formally training him as a professional wrestler. In wrestling, he became Roosevelt Jones, joining Mid-Atlantic in 1975, where he and his kayfabe cousin Rufus Jones would feud with the original Andersons, Ole and Gene. From there, the newly minted Roosevelt Jones would make his way to California, where he and Pork Chop Cash would win the NWA America's tag titles from the Hollywood Blondes. No, not those Hollywood Blondes. These Hollywood Blondes were Buddy Roberts and Jerry Brown. Jones and Cash would drop the titles back to the Blondes the following month, but Jones would win that same title in 1977, teaming this time with Tom Jones and taking the straps off Black Gordman and Goliath. Jones and Cash would trade the titles with Goliath and Gordman once more that very same year. Jones was absurdly strong. He was the training partner of his good friend Tony Atlas, himself a renowned strongman, and Atlas said that SD was one of the strongest men he had ever met. Reportedly, SD Jones could incline press over 400 pounds and curl over 225. It was Lou Albano who noticed Jones on the territories and recommended him to Vince McMahon Sr. The man called Roosevelt Jones began work for the WWWF in April 1974, taking on Nikolai Volkov in Trenton, New Jersey. Now you'll notice that these dates don't quite line up, as he held an NWA title at the same time he went to work for New York. Recall that back in the territory days, this was possible, indeed often standard operating practice. In the WWWF, he was rechristened Special Delivery Jones by Vince McMahon Sr., who said that he had been special delivered to him. Given his generation, it's probable that in the back of Vince Sr.'s mind was Edgar Special Delivery Jones, the Pitt running back and 1941 Heisman runner-up, who later played for the Chicago Bears and the Cleveland Browns. That name, Special Delivery Jones, had a legacy in the 1970s, as Edgar Jones' NFL career had transpired only 30 years before. It'd be like calling a guy the Big Hurt or Prime Time today. Special Delivery Jones was initially billed as being from Philadelphia, because they were concerned that people wouldn't know where Antigua was. Finally, he decided to represent his actual home though, and insisted on being billed from Antigua later in his career. In his early days with the company, Special Delivery Jones would get a good many wins in the mid-card, beating guys like Ron Shaw and his own trainer, Johnny Rodz. He was a tough match for any heel wrestler, but would most often come up short. In those early days, a frequent tag team partner was his good buddy Tony Atlas, and the pair would get 2 shots at the tag straps against Misters Fuji and Saito, failing to achieve the goal but giving the champs a good run for their money. In 1979, Greg the Hammer Valentine was new on the scene in the WWWF. He would wrestle Special Delivery Jones, putting him in his patented figure 4 leg lock and refusing to relinquish the hold. Jones would have to be stretchered out of the ring, and in his next appearance at Madison Square Garden, he would appear in a cast, demonstrating the lethal potential of the Hammer's finishing maneuver. And in 1981, SD Jones came perilously close to an opportunity that would have changed his career forever. At the time, Mr. Saito and Mr. Fuji were the tag team champions, and Tony Atlas and SD Jones were scheduled to challenge them for the straps at the Philadelphia Spectrum on a particular night that year. They didn't know it yet, but according to Atlas, they were scheduled to win the titles that night. But here was the rub. Tony Atlas has an extremely powerful shoe fetish, apparently to this day. A lady he had met in Los Angeles Angeles called him and told him to make it out to LA so she could walk on him with new tennis shoes. I am not making any of this up. Chief Jay Strongbow ran into Atlas and hinted and cajoled and explained in really no uncertain terms that he really needed to get to Philadelphia that night. But Atlas made up an excuse to get out to Los Angeles to see his lady friend and be walked on by her new tennis shoes. So Atlas missed the show, the match was cancelled, and he and SD did not get their title match where they presumably would have taken the belts. SD's best chance to escape the lower card in the WWF evaporated due to a pair of new women's tennis shoes. In 1984, Jones was involved in a pair of incredible historical moments as he tagged with Andre the Giant against Ken Patera and Big John Studd. After the match, Patera and Studd got the Giant down and cut his hair, a critical moment of the feud between Studd and Andre, which of course culminated at WrestleMania 1. The second moment was that very same year, July 14th, the infamous Black Saturday when Vince McMahon infamously purchased the TV time slot that had belonged to Georgia Championship Wrestling, running an end-around on Ole Anderson and TBS owner Ted Turner, creating a feud between the two promoters that would last the next 17 years and permanently alter the wrestling landscape in the United States. If you haven't heard the story of Black Saturday, look it up. It's incredible. I will do a video about it one of these days, but SD Jones was one of the WWF wrestlers who worked this show. You historians are likely highly attuned to the chronology here as we are approaching 0 hour for the complete reorganization of the wrestling landscape. In response to Starrcade, the flagship super show of his greatest competitor, the Southern-based Jim Crockett Promotions, Vince McMahon created his own super show in the spring of 1985, entitled Wrestlemania. The history surrounding this event is well known. In one of the many gigantic gambles that paid off in the course of his career, McMahon famously risked the entire company on the success of the first WrestleMania. To watch the first WrestleMania now when there have been 40 of them is to appreciate that first event's quaint, almost parochial charm. It's almost hard to imagine now when WrestleMania is one of the biggest live events of the year, with the production quality of the Super Bowl or the Oscars, but the 1985 incarnation is surprisingly small scale and rough around the edges. There is some indication of what it will become. The pageantry is there, the sense of gravitas, the sense of ultimate importance to the wrestling landscape. All of that is present from the very start. The main event is an odd outlier, a tag match of all things, between Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff on one side and Mr. T and the world champion Hulk Hogan on the other. In retrospect, this is more understandable as T was an enormous draw in that first event, moving the needle more than any other celebrity guest until arguably Mike Tyson at WrestleMania 14. King Kong Bundy's task in that fateful March evening was good old dependable Special Delivery Jones. Bundy was actually supposed to wrestle Tony Atlas that night. According to Atlas, SD even being there was an audible called apparently on the day of the show. Arnold Skalin told Atlas to take the night off that day, instead slotting SD Jones into the match. Atlas was one of the strongest men on the planet at the time, and apparently could press slam Bundy with very little trouble. He actually had a picture of himself doing that, so he showed it around, and that got around to the bosses. Now obviously the WWF brass could not allow that to happen, as Bundy was being built for Hulk Hogan the next year. But it's an amazing historical what if. Does the most iconic image in company history have the same weight 2 years later if Atlas had press slammed Bundy that night? But of course that's not what happened. Atlas was removed from the card and SD Jones, dependable old SD Jones, was slotted in. Bundy had only been in the company about 2 weeks, already annihilating his foes and pinning them for a 5 count to show how badly he had demolished them. This is a tall task for SD Jones, to be sure, but SD was no slouch. Maybe not as strong as Tony Atlas, but an extraordinary strongman in his own right. You probably already know what happened next. Bundy hit Jones with the avalanche in the corner and simply fell on him. Beneath the Giant, Jones was helpless. 9 seconds. December 12th, 2015, the main event of UFC 194. Conor McGregor versus the longtime featherweight king Jose Aldo. Aldo had won 18 straight fights, a winning streak that kept him spotless for more than a decade. It was a rather acrimonious feud, and the two refused to touch gloves prior to the contest. McGregor dispatched him in 13 seconds, rocketing him to superstardom and national attention. July 6th, 2019, UFC 239, Ben Askren vs. Jorge Masvidal. It was a rather acrimonious feud loaded with trash talk from both sides. Masvidal dispatched Askren in 5 seconds, rocketing him to superstardom and national attention. A quick, flashy highlight reel win is often a surefire ticket to superstardom. And so it was for King Kong Bundy. Suddenly, Bundy's stock experienced a meteoric rise, and the great monster would get his main event shot at the champion at WrestleMania 2 in 1986. It's such an odd thing in sports. In the right context, through extraordinary failure, may one achieve a kind of extraordinary grandeur. You become the canvas upon which is painted a masterpiece. By losing so spectacularly, Special Delivery Jones etched himself into the foundational bricks of professional wrestling's cornerstone. It can be tough to be on the losing end of one of these all-time legendary moments. It's certainly more fun to be the paint than to be the canvas. Bill Buckner played 21 seasons in Major League Baseball as a pretty good first baseman and outfielder, and he is largely remembered for one error. When people hear the name Bill Buckner, this moment is what they think of. Chris Webber has it better than Buckner did. His blunder was arguably just as egregious as Buckner's, calling a timeout in the NCAA title game when his Michigan Wolverines were out of timeouts. Maybe people don't instantly think of this moment when they hear the name Chris Webber the way they do with Buckner, but it is still an indelible, sizable feature of his legacy. By such moments are careers defined, for good or ill. It's probably not fair to assign as an identity one painful moment of defeat. But the lack of fairness does not change the reality that such an identity will be formed in the common consciousness. For every John Elway the drive, for every Dwight Clark the catch, there has to be its diametric opposite. The universe must balance the books. This is an incredible aspect of sports if you think about it. The stakes are, in the grand scheme of things, relatively low. The fates of lives and nations don't exactly hang in the balance in any given Super Bowl. And yet, in the moment, it can feel as if life and death and everything in between, fate itself, hangs in the balance. From the greatest heights to the lowest of depths. Any given sporting event, you can't know ahead of time if you will witness one of those moments. It's frankly unlikely that it will happen just based on the numbers, but it could. And when it does, you'll probably still be thinking about it years after the fact. King Kong Bundy said that SD complained about the match, that he didn't want to do it, that he did not go out as the good little soldier and take his beating. Bundy says that he lost a lot of respect for SD on the night of WrestleMania 1. In the moment, I can understand not wanting to get beaten so quickly, a feeling like you were being made to look a fool. It created an incredible WrestleMania moment, but I can't say I'm surprised that Jones didn't necessarily want to do it. As great as these moments in sports can be, it can sting the ego to be on the downside of one. Though it also must be said that it's certainly not a career killer, or it doesn't have to be. Unless you believe that Triple H's career was ended by the Ultimate Warrior essentially doing the same thing to him at WrestleMania 12. Okay, so you're probably already aware that the match was actually not 9 seconds. Some say it was 17, some say 22, some say 23. I say who cares? Truth and fact can differ at times. The timing was off because of Jones, according to Bundy. Jones was annoyed about having to do it, so he deliberately extended the match. It was supposed to be 9 seconds, so that's what Gorilla and Jesse said on commentary, even though that didn't exactly reflect temporal reality. Whatever he felt about it, whatever is the truth of why the match's timing was off, Special Delivery Jones was thus an integral part of the construction of the WWF's 1980s golden age. Bundy smashed him, and thus was taken more seriously as a terrifying monster to face Hulk Hogan a year later. As champion, Hogan needed giants to vanquish, and SD Jones helped put the building blocks into the foundation for one of these giants. He was in fact an integral part of that golden age in more ways than one. To explain this next one requires a little bit of context. The WWF's cover of Land of a Thousand Dances required the confluence of several disparate trends in pop culture and entertainment. Concurrent with the growth of the Golden Age was something called the Rock and Wrestling Connection. Lou Albano met pop star Cyndi Lauper on a vacation to Puerto Rico, and he got the idea of blending their respective industries. The company went with Albano's idea. To say this was successful is an extraordinary understatement. This blending of industries propelled the meteoric expansion of professional wrestling in the 1980s. Hulk Hogan had a Saturday morning cartoon that contributed to his exploding popularity. Albano appeared in Lauper's music videos, while Lauper of course famously appeared at WrestleMania 1. In the 1980s, Vince McMahon was notably willing to experiment with different forms of entertainment. The company of course created Tuesday Night Titans, sort of a Johnny Carson-style late-night program. Later they turned primetime wrestling into a sort of Phil Donahue-esque studio program with a live studio audience. A former boxing promoter, he would promote a boxing match between Mr. T and Roddy Piper at the second WrestleMania. And in keeping with the theme of the Rock and Wrestling Connection, he and his wrestlers would record an album. The wrestling album, if you haven't heard it, is wonderful. Do not look at the reviews, they're wrong. The album absolutely slaps. My personal favorite track is JYD's Grab Them Cakes, but they're all great. One of these was a cover of Land of a Thousand Dances. You've probably heard this song. The original was by a guy named Chris Kenner in 1962, but like All Along the Watchtower, Nothing Compares to You, and I Will Always Love You, the most famous version was also a cover, that being by Wilson Pickett in the mid-60s. The WWF's version is so great. If you haven't seen it, pause this video, open another browser tab, and go watch it real quick. I would just put the whole thing in the video if I thought they'd let me get away with it. But here is SD's part. Yep, that's it. Not that anybody had that long of a part, but that was SD's moment. He helped build something else incredible. He was part of the foundation for some of the biggest moments of the era. One of the bricks that built the great cathedrals of the wrestling moments of the age. If you laid one brick on the Cathedral of Notre Dame, if you worked the concession stand during the Thrilla in Manila, if you swept the floors of the factory that printed the paper where they published War and Peace, man, you are a part of that history. You are one dab of paint, one measure of music, one chapter in a magnum opus. That's incredible. How many of us can say that? Special Delivery Jones was in the WWF for 5 more years after WrestleMania 1, never again touching the great heights of his WrestleMania appearance and his brief musical career. But SD Jones was an absolute pony for the World Wrestling Federation, one of the more dependable guys they've ever had. Hulk Hogan once famously claimed to have spent a year in the company where he worked more matches than there are days in the year, and then claimed that this was due to crossing the date line back and forth to Japan. That math may share something in common with the oft-stated dubious figure of Wilt Chamberlain's most impressive record, but in the case of Hogan's dubious busy year, Special Delivery Jones got pretty close to it. He averaged 240 matches a year, and in 1978 and 1984 he was over 300. The temporal definition of Special Delivery Jones' WWF career can vary a bit depending on the source you check. The bulk of it fell between 1978 and 1986, though his actual final match in the company was on October 19, 1990, losing to friend of the channel Iron Mike Sharp in Madison Square Garden. After leaving the WWF, he worked briefly in Herb Abrams' Universal Wrestling Federation, retiring for good in 1995. Whatever was his win-loss record in the World Wrestling Federation, Special Delivery Jones was notable enough to merit not 1, but 2 LJN action figures of him. The 2 figures reflected Jones' 2 build hometowns. One is Philadelphia SD, and the other is decidedly Antiguan SD. Details about Special Delivery Jones' life are scant after he left wrestling. We know he worked for the New York Daily News for a number of years immediately after leaving the sport. At some point in the late 90s or early 2000s, he and Kay went home, moving back to Antigua in retirement. In 2006, he made one final appearance for the WWE, inducting his old friend and tag team partner Tony Atlas into the Hall of Fame. In October of 2008, according to his wife Kay, he was having a great Wednesday, laughing and singing and enjoying the day. He went out to feed the dogs, came back, and he said Kay's name, and then he fell limp. They took him to the doctor, where it was discovered that 3/4 of his brain was covered in blood. He had suffered a massive stroke. SD Jones died 2 days later at the age of 63. He and Kay had been married for 39 years after meeting his children. In 2019, he was posthumously added to the WWE Hall of Fame, inducted by, who else? Tony Atlas, returning the favor. On his co-workers and friends, he had left an indelible impression. Tony Atlas told a story of getting fired by the WWF and calling up the Gagnes at the AWA for a job. Verne said that he would bring him in, but he couldn't for a month, so Atlas was forced to stay at a hotel until he could start for Gagne. SD Jones and his wife Kay insisted that Tony spend that month with them, since he was unemployed. When Vince McMahon found out about this arrangement, he demanded that SD kick Atlas out. SD refused and said that he wouldn't and couldn't do that to his friend. That's an incredible story. It's easy to see somebody on Hulk Hogan or Steve Austin's level telling Vince McMahon to stick it. For somebody at SD's level, that's really something. It's indicative of the kind of guy he was. SD Jones was one of the greatest carpenters of the WWF Golden Age, an undersized competitor who was nevertheless an absolute powerhouse. A babyface counterpart to the heel jobber to the stars, Iron Mike Sharp. In some ways, his character reminds me of friend of the channel Mario Mancini. Likeable, scrappy babyface type that will give the heels as hard a time as they would want on any given night. He was a good wrestler, good worker, a good friend, and apparently just a really good guy. For the Jobber Chronicles, I am the world-renowned historian. Thank you for watching. Be good, kiddos. Peace out.